Imagine you're walking to work. You reach into your coat pocket and you realize a crisp $100 bill you had in there is just gone.
Oh, no.
Right, it must have fallen out when you pulled out your keys. Think about that specific, highly irritating sting.
It's the worst.
You replay your whole morning, you kick yourself for not putting it in your wallet, you feel this genuine sense of loss. But now, imagine a completely different scenario. You're walking home, you look down, and there's a $100 bill sitting perfectly on the sidewalk.
Just waiting for you.
Yeah, you pick it up, you feel this burst of luck, maybe a quick dopamine hit. Now, mathematically, in both of those scenarios, your net worth has changed by exactly $100.
Exactly 100.
But psychologically, those two events do not feel the same. Like, at all. The pain of losing that money is going to linger with you long after the joy of finding it would have just faded away.
Yeah, totally.
And that discrepancy, that fundamental weirdness in how we feel about money, that is the gateway to everything we are exploring today. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's really the perfect gateway. Because for a very long time, the smartest people in the room fundamentally ignored that discrepancy.
They just pretended it didn't exist.
Pretty much. I mean, they built entire global financial systems assuming that human beings treated those $200 bills exactly the same.
Which brings us to the mission for today's discussion. We aren't here to give you stock picks or, tell you how to rebalance your 401k or offer any traditional financial advice.
All right, no hot tips today.
Exactly. Instead, we are looking at this huge stack of foundational research in behavioral economics to unpack the psychology of why we behave the way we do with our money.
And it is fascinating why.
It really is. We want to understand the invisible forces driving everything from our worst investing mistakes to our daily spending habits. And to understand how far we've come, we really have to look back at the 20th century.
Yeah, the dark ages of economic theory.
There was this prevailing academic myth, this central dogma of economics that feels almost laughable when you look at actual human behavior.
The myth of the rational actor.
Right.
The Latin term the field used was Homo economicus. And throughout the vast majority of the 20th century, macroeconomic models were built on the assumption that you, me, and literally everyone else operated as perfectly rational, calculating machines.
Which is just, have they met a human being?
You'd wonder. The premise was that whenever we face a financial decision, we gather all available information, objectively calculate the costs, weigh the benefits, strip out all emotional distortion, and just consistently act to maximize our absolute best financial interest.
I try to imagine Homo economicus walking through a modern shopping mall or like browsing Amazon at 2 in the morning. It just doesn't compute. Did serious economists genuinely believe we were all just walking spreadsheets?
Well, they built their overarching models as if we were. And to be fair to them, the mathematics of market efficiency in classical economics, they were beautiful, elegant, and clean.
If you just assumed everyone acted rationally.
Right. It made the math work. But the empirical evidence for that assumption, actual observations of human beings making actual choices, was incredibly thin.
Yeah.
It was essentially convenient academic fiction.
A fantasy.
Yeah. And the paradigm shift didn't really happen until the late 1970s. And importantly, it didn't even come from economists.
Wait, really? Who did it come from?
It came from two psychologists from Israel, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
Two absolute titans. Like, they are the names you inevitably hit the exact moment you start reading about behavioral economics.
They systematically dismantled the myth of the rational actor. Through this series of incredibly clever, robust experiments, Kahneman and Tversky proved that human financial decision-making is not rational in the traditional sense at all.
Not even close.
But their brilliance wasn't just in pointing out that we made mistakes.
Yeah.
The major breakthrough was proving that we aren't just chaotic or random with our money. Our decision-making is systematically biased.
Systematic.
Yes, we make errors in highly predictable, documentable patterns.
We are predictably irrational, which means we're making the exact same structural errors over and over again. And looking at the sources we've gathered, there's a massive caveat here that I think we need to put front and center for the listener.
A knowledge problem.
Exactly. Because the natural assumption is, okay, teach me about the biases. Once I know about them, I'll be cured. I'll never buy a stock at the top of the market again. But the research makes it explicitly, painfully clear. Merely having knowledge of these cognitive biases does not cure you of them.
It is a very humbling reality for anyone studying the field. You can hold a PhD in behavioral economics, write textbooks on the subject, and still fall into these exact same financial traps in your personal life.
Because these biases aren't a lack of information. They operate at the level of automatic, intuitive processing.
Below the conscious radar.
Right. They happen below the threshold of our deliberate thought. I was thinking about the classic Mueller-Lyer optical illusion. The two parallel lines where one has arrows pointing inward and the other has arrows pointing outward.
Sure, the line length one.
Even when you take a ruler and physically measure the lines and prove to yourself they are the exact same length, your brain still automatically perceives one as longer. The knowledge doesn't stop the visual cortex from processing the illusion.
That analogy holds up perfectly for financial cognition. Knowledge isn't a magical force field. But that doesn't mean this deep dive is an exercise in futility.
Definitely not.
The ultimate goal here, the reason this research is so critical, is that by understanding these predictable errors, you transition into becoming a highly accurate observer of your own behavior.
Right.
You stop blindly trusting your intuition when it comes to risk and value.
You start catching yourself in the act. You feel that impulse to panic sell a mutual fund. And instead of just acting on it, you pause and say, wait, is this me making a rational decision, or is my brain running that ancient software again?
Exactly. You build a buffer between the impulse and the action. And more structurally, you can use this knowledge to design better decision environments for yourself.
Guardrails.
Yeah, guardrails. If you know your internal calculator is flawed, you stop relying on it. You build safeguards, you automate good behaviors, and you create rules to protect you from the biases you know are coming anyway.
So if we aren't perfectly rational calculating machines, we need to locate the glitch. What is the fundamental error in our internal calculators? And digging into Kahneman and Tversky's work, it seems to originate from a profound asymmetry in how we experience emotion.
It really does. The emotional experience of money is entirely lopsided. This asymmetry is the bedrock of behavioral economics. It's encapsulated in a concept called loss aversion.
Loss aversion.
Right. It's so foundational that it was the primary driver behind Kahneman winning the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002.
Let's break down the mechanics of loss aversion, because it connects right back to that $100 bill scenario we opened with.
Kahneman and Tversky wanted to measure the psychological weight of gaining money versus the psychological weight of losing it. And through a massive data set of choices, they uncovered this mathematical reality of human emotion.
The 2-to-1 ratio.
Precisely. Losing something is psychologically experienced as approximately twice as painful as gaining that exact same thing feels good. The sting of the loss is disproportionately loud.
So losing $100 inflicts double the emotional damage that finding $100 provides in joy, which, on paper, sounds like a quirky psychological parlor trick. But the sources map out how this simple asymmetry infects some of our most consequential financial decisions, particularly in investing.
It's the primary driver of why investors consistently hold on to tanking stocks far longer than they should.
Okay, let's walk through that. Let's look at the rational approach first.
Sure. So you buy a stock. The company fundamentally changes for the worse. The stock tanks. The objective spreadsheet-driven move is to sell, take whatever capital is left, and redeploy it into an asset with a better expected return.
Cut your losses. I mean, it's investing 101.
But the human brain vehemently fights that logic. Because as long as you hold the stock, the loss is just a number on a screen. It's unrealized.
It's theoretical.
Exactly. The moment you execute the trade and click sell, you make the loss real. You lock it in. And because of loss aversion, locking in that loss triggers an intense, disproportionate wave of psychological pain.
So we freeze.
We freeze completely.
We sit there and watch the position bleed out because holding on to the asset, even a fundamentally broken asset, preserves the hope of recovery. We're using hope as a mechanism to defer the pain of a realized loss.
We are willing to take on extreme, irrational risk just to avoid finalizing a loss. And this 2-to-1 asymmetry doesn't just show up in high-stakes investing. It completely dictates our mundane, everyday consumer behavior, too.
Like what?
Think about the difference between a fee and a discount.
Oh, this is everywhere. If I go to a coffee shop and there's a sign that says 50-cent surcharge for using a credit card, I will dig through my pockets, hold up the line, and try to find loose change just to avoid the fee.
Right.
But if the sign says 50-cent discount for paying in cash, I usually don't even bother. I just tap my card. The monetary value is identical. It's 50 cents either way.
The net outcome to your wallet is exactly the same. But the framing changes your behavior entirely.
It's wild.
A surcharge is framed as a penalty, a loss. A discount is framed as a bonus, a gain. Because your brain is wired to feel losses twice as acutely as gains, you are significantly more motivated to navigate around the fee than you are to capture the discount.
And marketers know this, don't they?
Oh, they rely on it. They know that framing something as avoiding a loss will drive much higher compliance than framing it as achieving a gain.
The power of framing brings up another phenomenon detailed in the research, which is a direct descendant of loss aversion, the endowment effect. And the classic demonstration of this is the coffee mug experiment. The setup here is just so elegant.
It is a beautiful piece of academic research. Richard Taylor, along with Kahneman and Jack Nitch, went into a university classroom. They randomly gave half the students an ordinary, everyday coffee mug with the university logo on it.
Sure.
The other half of the room received nothing.
And keep in mind, this is random distribution. There's no reason to believe the people who got the mugs inherently liked coffee mugs more than the people who didn't.
None at all.
Yeah.
So they then created a makeshift market. They asked the students who owned the mugs to state the minimum price they would be willing to accept to sell their mug.
And the others.
Then they asked the students who didn't have a mug to state the maximum price they would be willing to pay to buy one.
Right. So in a rational market, the average selling price and the average buying price should be roughly identical. The item has an objective market value.
But the results were wildly divergent. The buyers were willing to pay, on average, around $2.85.
Okay, $2.85. And the sellers?
The sellers demanded an average of $7.12 to part with the exact same mug.
They demanded more than double. Just because they had been handed a cheap ceramic mug a few minutes prior, its value doubled in their minds.
The object itself was completely unchanged. But the state of ownership changed the psychological valuation. Because once you own the mug, selling it is no longer just a neutral transaction.
It's a loss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Selling it represents giving something up. It is coded by the brain as a loss.
Right.
And since we know losses demand a higher premium to overcome that 2-to-1 ratio, the sellers naturally inflated the price.
It makes me think about trying to sell a used car, or maybe like the house you grew up in. You check the Kelley Blue Book value of your old sedan and it says $4,000.
Yeah.
But you look at the car and think, no, this car has been perfectly reliable. I brought my dog home in this car. We drove it to the coast. It has to be worth $6,000. We subconsciously bake the emotional value of our memories and the simple friction of giving up ownership directly into the asking price.
We genuinely, honestly believe the item is worth more simply because it belongs to us. We chronically overvalue our own possessions.
It's fascinating.
And Kahneman and Tversky formalize all of this loss aversion, the endowment effect, the framing of gains and losses into a comprehensive mathematical model called prospect theory. Specifically, they mapped out the value function, which is this S-shaped curve.
Okay, let's visualize that S-curve for the listener, because understanding the shape of that line explains a lot of our erratic behavior.
Picture a standard graph. The horizontal x-axis represents the objective amount of money gains moving to the right, losses moving to the left. The vertical y-axis represents the psychological value, how you actually feel positive emotion going up, negative emotion going down.
Got it.
Now, if we were the rational Homo economicus, this graph would just be a perfectly straight 45-degree diagonal line. Winning $50 makes you 50 units happy. Losing $50 makes you 50 units sad.
Proportional and symmetrical.
But the human value function is an S-curve, and it is highly asymmetrical. Look at the right side of the graph, the gains. As you gain more money, the line goes up, but it starts to curve and flatten out. There are diminishing marginal returns on joy. Finding $100 feels amazing. Finding a second $100 feels good, but not quite as amazing as the first. The joy tapers off.
It's like stepping into a hot shower. The initial jump from cold to hot is highly noticeable, but turning it up another 5 degrees barely registers.
Exactly. Now look at the left side of the graph, the losses. This is where it gets dangerous.
Yeah.
As you move left into negative territory, the line doesn't just mirror the gain side. It drops steeply and sharply downward.
Because of loss aversion.
Right. The slope for losses is significantly steeper than the slope for gains. The visual representation perfectly captures the reality. Our internal emotional calculus is fundamentally mathematically weighted against losing.
Okay, so prospect theory shows us that we assign immense emotional weight to money based purely on the direction it's moving, whether it's coming into our pocket or leaving it. But that realization naturally leads to a secondary problem.
Which is?
If we're that sensitive to gaining versus losing, do we also assign different weights to money based on where it came from?
That is the core of the next major behavioral hurdle. And to understand it, we have to contrast it with the economic ideal of fungibility.
Fungibility, the absolute cornerstone of a rational accounting system.
In classical economics, fungibility simply means that individual units of a good are completely interchangeable. A dollar is a dollar.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you earned it through hourly wages, found it on the street, or won it in a lottery. It doesn't matter if it's sitting in a checking account or a shoebox. A perfectly rational actor aggregates all their resources into one unified pool and treats every single dollar with the exact same level of respect and utility.
Yet the central theme of behavioral economics is that human psychology vehemently rejects fungibility.
We reject it completely. Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel in 2017, spent years documenting how we actively dismantle fungibility through a process he called mental accounting.
Mental accounting.
Instead of maintaining one unified pool of money, our brains create an elaborate filing system of little imaginary buckets or mental accounts.
We categorize our money based on its origin, its intended purpose, and the emotion attached to it. And the critical flaw is that the rules for how we are willing to spend change drastically, depending on which mental bucket the money is sitting in.
Let's examine the windfall effect. This is one of the most common manifestations of mental accounting.
Okay, what's a windfall in this context?
A windfall is any unexpected receipt of money, a bonus at work, an inheritance, a gift, or a tax refund. Economically, that money is entirely fungible with your regular salary.
Right.
But psychologically, the brain intercepts that money and immediately routes it into a mental account labeled windfall or bonus.
And the rules for the windfall account are notoriously lax.
Extremely lax. The research highlights a brilliant contrast. Take a person who is incredibly disciplined with their biweekly paycheck. They budget carefully, they pay their rent, they buy groceries.
Very responsible.
They would never, under any circumstances, take $300 out of their regular checking account to go blow on an extravagant Michelin star dinner. It would feel terribly irresponsible because that money is in a mental account labeled serious survival money.
It's earmarked for reality.
But if that exact same person receives a $300 tax refund in the mail, their behavior flips.
Oh, I've seen this.
They will happily take that specific check, go to the expensive restaurant, and order the tasting menu without a second thought. They treat the tax refund as play money.
Which is such a bizarre cognitive blind spot, especially with a tax refund. That isn't a gift from the universe. A tax refund is literally your own hard-earned paycheck money that the government withheld over the course of the year.
Yes.
It is the exact same labor, the exact same dollars.
But because it arrived via a different delivery mechanism and at an unexpected time, the source changed the mental account. And changing the mental account completely bypassed their normal financial discipline.
It's self-deception. And while blowing a tax refund on dinner is relatively harmless, the sources detail how mental accounting gets weaponized in the financial markets. The house money effect.
Yes, the house money effect.
I want to interrogate this a bit because when you read about the mechanics of a casino, the psychology is terrifyingly effective.
The term originates from gambling, but it applies perfectly to retail investing. An investor puts $50,000 of their savings into an index fund. The market goes on a massive run, and a year later, the portfolio is worth $60,000.
Great year.
A rational actor looks at their statement and sees a unified pool of $60,000 of their own wealth.
But the human brain splits the ledger. The brain looks at the statement and says, okay, I have $50,000 of my money, and I have $10,000 of the market's money. The gains are segregated into a mental account labeled house money. I mean, I see the logic the brain is using, but if the money is sitting in my account and I can withdraw it to pay my mortgage today, it is my money. Why does labeling it house money change our behavior so drastically?
Because the house money label acts as an artificial suppressant on our natural loss aversion. Normally, as we discussed, you are terrified of losing $10,000.
Right.
But if the brain doesn't consider it your money yet, the pain of losing it is neutralized. You start thinking, well, if I lose this $10,000, I'm just back to my original $50,000. No harm, no foul.
Which opens the door to massive, uncharacteristic risk-taking.
Precisely why we see retail investors suddenly pulling their profits out of boring, stable index funds and throwing them into highly volatile, speculative assets. Crypto, leveraged options, meme stocks.
Things they'd normally avoid.
They would never touch those assets with their initial $50,000. But because it's house money, they treat it like casino chips. The tragedy is, it is their money. If they lose it on a bad options trade, they aren't back where they started. they have suffered a real $10,000 reduction in their net worth.
But mental accounting creates an illusion that blinds them to the reality of the loss.
It completely masks the risk.
Now, let's look at the flip side of mental accounting, because sometimes we don't just segregate gains, we refuse to accept losses. We have to walk through the terrible movie theater scenario.
The textbook illustration of the sunk cost fallacy.
Yes, the sunk cost fallacy. Walk us through it.
It's arguably the most pervasive mental accounting trap. You pay $20 for a ticket to a new movie, you sit down, the lights go down, and 45 minutes into the film you realize it is agonizingly bad.
The worst.
The plot is incoherent, the dialogue is painful, you're having a miserable time.
So what does the rational spreadsheet tell you to do?
The spreadsheet says you stand up and walk out immediately. The logic is impenetrable. The $20 is gone. It is a sunk cost. Whether you stay in the theater or leave, you cannot get the $20 back.
Right, that transaction is in the past.
Therefore, the money is completely irrelevant to your next decision. The only resource you are deciding how to allocate right now is the next hour and 15 minutes of your time. If you stay, you suffer a double loss. You lost the $20, and you lose an hour of your life being miserable.
Double loss.
If you leave, you still lost the $20, but you regain an hour to do something you actually enjoy.
The math is flawless. Leaving is the only logical choice. And yet, almost nobody leaves. We stay planted in the uncomfortable seat, actively suffering. Why?
Because of the psychological friction of closing a mental account in the red.
Explain that.
When you purchased the ticket, you subconsciously opened a mental account labeled entertainment investment. If you walk out of the theater halfway through, you are actively declaring that the investment was a total failure. You are forcing yourself to close the account at a loss.
You have to admit defeat.
And human beings hate admitting defeat. By staying and watching the terrible movie to the bitter end, you somehow convince yourself you are getting your money's worth.
Just ridiculous.
It is. You are using your own prolonged misery to balance the mental accounting ledger. You refuse to close the account at a loss, so you throw good time after bad money.
It's why we finish books we hate, and why companies pour billions into failing projects. We've come this far, we can't stop now. It is fascinating how the ledger rules our lives. And it leads to some truly absurd contradictions, particularly when you look at how people manage savings and debt simultaneously.
The coexistence of emergency funds and high-interest credit card debt. This is where mental accounting literally bleeds people dry.
Yeah, let's get into this.
It is highly recommended and very common for people to have specific buckets for their money. You have an account for rent, an account for a future vacation, and an account labeled emergency fund.
That sounds incredibly responsible. You're organizing your financial life?
It is responsible until the mental walls between those accounts become impenetrable. The absurdity occurs when an individual has, let's say, $8,000 sitting in an emergency fund savings account that is earning perhaps a 1% interest rate.
Okay.
Simultaneously, that exact same individual is carrying $8,000 of rolling credit card debt at a 22% interest rate.
Mathematically, that is a catastrophe.
They are losing hundreds of dollars a month in net wealth. The only rational, mathematically sound move is to immediately take the $8,000 from savings, wipe out the credit card debt entirely, and then aggressively rebuild the emergency fund, using the money they're no longer bleeding out in interest payments.
But if you suggest that to someone, they will look at you like you are insane. They resist it fiercely.
Because if they empty the savings account to pay the credit card, the emergency fund mental bucket drops to zero. And that triggers immense psychological panic.
Yeah.
The brain views the two accounts as completely separate entities.
It fails to aggregate them to see the overall net worth.
Right. People are literally willing to pay 22% interest strictly for the emotional premium of logging into their banking app and seeing a positive balance sitting in a bucket labeled safety.
We lie to ourselves about the value of our dollars just to keep our mental buckets organized. But, if our accounting system is this fundamentally flawed, it begs a much larger question about how we view the world outside of our accounts.
How so?
How do we assess the actual dangers our money faces? Because if we can't do basic fungible math, our risk assessment must be totally distorted.
It is deeply distorted, largely because our assessment of risk isn't based on statistics, it's based on memory. This brings us to a cognitive shortcut known as the availability heuristic.
The availability heuristic. This is a concept from cognitive psychology that bleeds heavily into behavioral finance. Let's define the mechanism here.
A heuristic is just a mental shortcut. The availability heuristic dictates that human beings estimate the probability or frequency of an event occurring based entirely on how easily examples of that event come to mind.
Okay.
If a memory is easily retrievable, if it is available to your conscious brain, you automatically assume the event is highly probable.
So ease of recall equals statistical likelihood in our brains.
Exactly. And what makes a memory easy to recall? Vividness, emotional intensity, drama, and recency. If an event is highly dramatic or happened very recently, it burns a deep groove into your memory.
And then what?
When you go to assess risk, that vivid memory jumps to the front of the line, completely overshadowing actual boring statistical base rates.
Let's apply this to the stock market because it explains the exact mechanism of panic selling. Let's look at the investors who sell at the absolute bottom of a crash.
Think about the psychological environment of a severe market contraction, the 2008 financial crisis, or the sudden, violent market crash at the onset of COVID-19 in early 2020.
The imagery is terrifying. You are logging in every day and watching 20% of your life savings evaporate. The news networks have giant red graphics flashing on the screen. The emotional trauma is intense.
That trauma creates a highly vivid, easily accessible memory. So what happens a few months later when the market bottoms out and perhaps begins to stabilize?
They're still scared.
The traumatized investor tries to assess the risk of staying in the market. But the only memory their brain serves up is the recent, vivid trauma of the crash. The availability heuristic artificially inflates the probability of an immediate secondary crash. They become convinced the sky is about to fall again.
Even though historically the statistical base rate of a market recovery after a severe drawdown is actually quite high.
The statistics don't matter because statistics aren't vivid. The fear is vivid. So, driven by the availability heuristic, they panic and sell at the absolute bottom, moving everything to cash. And in doing so, they completely miss the subsequent statistical recovery.
But the heuristic swings both ways, right? It also creates the top buyers.
Yes, it explains the euphoria at the peak of a bubble. Consider an investor who enters the market during a decade-long bull run. Year after year, the market grinds upward. They buy a tech stock, it goes up. They buy an index fund, it goes up.
Sounds nice.
After 5 or 6 years of consistent gains, their brain has cataloged thousands of positive reinforcing memories.
And crucially, they lack any vivid memories of a crash.
Precisely. The concept of a severe loss is not available in their memory bank. Because they cannot easily recall the pain of a bear market, their brain assumes the probability of a crash is near zero. They literally lose the cognitive capacity to accurately imagine risk. So they leverage up, they pour money into highly valued, speculative assets, right at the absolute peak of the market, right when the statistical danger is actually highest.
It's an internal reality distortion field, and it extends far beyond investing. The availability heuristic dictates how we view mundane versus dramatic risks in our physical lives, which often dictate our insurance and spending habits.
We systematically misjudge the hazards around us. Statistically, the things most likely to harm you are incredibly mundane heart disease, getting into a fender bender on your evening commute, or simply tripping and falling on the stairs at home. These events happen thousands of times a day.
But they don't make the front page of the newspaper. Nobody writes a thrilling novel about falling off a stepladder.
Because they lack narrative drama, they aren't vivid. Therefore, we underestimate their probability and we underprepare for them. Conversely, we massively overestimate the risk of highly dramatic, statistically rare events, plane crashes, shark attacks, terrorist incidents.
Right.
The statistical probability of dying in a plane crash is vanishingly small. But when one happens, it dominates the global news cycle for weeks. You see vivid, horrifying images of wreckage.
The memory is seared into your brain, so the next time you book a flight, that memory is instantly available, and your brain tells you, this is incredibly dangerous.
You might even choose to drive 12 hours instead of taking a 2-hour flight, completely ignoring the fact that driving is statistically exponentially more dangerous than flying. The vividness of the plane crash overrides the boring data of highway fatalities.
I was trying to map this onto our current technological landscape, and it strikes me that modern social media is basically an availability heuristic amplification machine. It is designed to weaponize this exact cognitive flaw.
It is the perfect delivery system for distorted probabilities.
Think about scrolling through a financial TikTok feed or Twitter. The algorithms are optimized for engagement, which means they surface the most extreme dramatic outliers. You scroll for 10 minutes and you see 5 different people claiming they turn $1,000 into $1 million trading some obscure cryptocurrency or a meme stock.
You are receiving a concentrated, highly curated dose of vivid success stories.
Right. And what you don't see are the 99,000 other people who made the exact same trade and quietly lost their rent money. Nobody makes a viral video about slowly losing $400 on a Tuesday.
No, they don't.
The failures are invisible, the wild successes are hyper visible, so your brain absorbs these available memories and artificially inflates the probability of extreme success. You start thinking, well, everyone else is getting rich overnight, the odds must be pretty good.
Which perfectly explains why the lottery continues to be a multi-billion-dollar industry despite the math.
Oh, the math of a lottery ticket is abysmal. It has a deeply negative expected value. It is essentially a tax on people who are bad at math.
But the marketing of the lottery is a masterclass in the availability heuristic. When someone wins the Powerball, it is a massive media event. You see the giant novelty check, the balloons, the ecstatic winner giving interviews about how their life has changed forever.
Very memorable.
That image is incredibly memorable. What is entirely invisible are the millions and millions of people who stood in line at a gas station, bought a piece of paper, and threw it in the trash. The singular, vivid winner hijacks our risk assessment, making the mathematically impossible feel tangible.
Our internal probability calculators are fundamentally compromised by dramatic narratives. So we know vivid memories from our past severely distort our present reality. But what happens when we try to look forward?
The future.
What about our future? Because if there is one universal financial struggle, it is the inability to make sacrifices today for the benefit of tomorrow. Why are we so terrible at planning for the long term?
This is perhaps the most heavily researched and deeply documented arena of financial irrationality, the paradox of retirement savings.
The paradox.
When you look at survey data across demographics and income levels, people consistently state that they want to save for retirement. They know they need to. They even formulate plans to do so. Yet, they systematically fail to execute those plans.
We have the intention, but we lack the execution. The friction between today and tomorrow is just too high.
The primary culprit generating that friction is a psychological mechanism called present bias. And the mathematical engine driving present bias is a phenomenon known as hyperbolic discounting.
Present bias and hyperbolic discounting. We need to take our time and walk through the mechanics of this because this math is the invisible force ruining most people's financial plans.
Present bias is the human tendency to assign a disproportionately high value to rewards we can experience immediately while heavily discounting the value of rewards we have to wait for. We have a severe bias toward the now. To understand the math of hyperbolic discounting, let's run a classic behavioral thought experiment. If I offer you a choice, I can give you $100 right now, today, or I can give you $110 exactly 1 week from today. Which do you choose?
Oh, I would take the $100 today. And I think almost everyone would. Waiting an entire week just to gain 10 extra dollars feels tedious. The immediate gratification of the $100 is much more appealing.
Exactly. The present reward is heavily favored. But now let's take those exact same people and offer them a second scenario.
Okay, what is it?
I ask you, would you prefer to receive $100 in exactly 52 weeks from today? Or would you prefer to receive $110 in 53 weeks from today?
Well, in that scenario, I'm already forced to wait a full year, 52 weeks, just to get the first option. Since I'm already waiting a year, waiting 1 extra week to get an extra $10 feels trivial. I'll take the $110 in 53 weeks.
And that shift in your choice is hyperbolic discounting in action. I want you to notice what just happened mathematically. The time delay between the two options, 1 single week, is absolutely identical in both scenarios.
Oh, wow. You're right. It's a 1 week wait to get the extra $10, regardless of the scenario.
The variable isn't the duration of the wait. The variable is the placement of that wait in time. When the 1 week delay is right in front of your face, right now, the psychological friction is immense.
Right. I want it now.
The curve of discounting is incredibly steep in the immediate present. You demand the money today. But when that exact same 1 week delay is pushed far out into the future, the discounting curve flattens out, the friction disappears, and you easily make the patient a mathematically superior choice.
We are systematically inconsistent depending on how close we are to the reward.
The sources refer to this as dynamic inconsistency. Our preferences actually change as time passes. It's the exact same architecture behind the classic New Year's resolution failure.
The parallels are perfect. Imagine it's the evening of December 31st. You are sitting on the couch, eating a bowl of ice cream, and you confidently declare, starting tomorrow, January 1st, I'm going on a strict diet. Making that commitment feels incredibly easy. Why? Because on December 31st, the pain and sacrifice of the diet belong to a psychologically distant entity known as future you.
Right. Present you gets to enjoy the ice cream, while future you has to eat the kale.
Precisely. But what happens when you wake up the next morning? It is January 1st. The diet starts now. You are no longer future you are present you. And present you is subject to present bias.
Very much so.
The immediate, tangible comfort of a warm donut is valued disproportionately higher than the distant, abstract reward of long-term cardiovascular health. The dynamic inconsistency kicks in, the preference changes, and the diet is abandoned.
It's inevitable for most people.
Reading through the research on this actually sparked a somewhat philosophical question for me. Because the way we treat this future, you saddling them with all the diets, all the savings plans, all the hard work while we enjoy the present, it feels incredibly callous. Does the human brain actually neurologically view our future self as a total stranger? Are we essentially forcing a random roommate to do all our chores?
You've hit on the exact neurological reality of psychological distance. Researchers have actually put people into fMRI machines to map their brain activity while they think about different subjects.
Really? What happened?
When you think about yourself right now, a specific region of the brain, the medial prefrontal cortex, lights up brightly. When you think about a complete stranger, maybe a celebrity you don't know, that region is much less active.
And what happens when they think about themselves in the future?
When subjects are asked to think about themselves 10 or 20 years in the future, the medial prefrontal cortex activity drops significantly. It mirrors the brain scan of someone thinking about a total stranger.
That is wild.
We lack a deep emotional neurological connection to our future selves. So when a financial advisor tells you to increase your 401k contributions, the required sacrifice, giving up a vacation, eating out less, is demanded entirely from present you.
But the reward goes to someone else.
Exactly. The reward of comfortable retirement is handed over to future you, who your brain processes as a stranger. It is incredibly difficult to motivate present you to suffer for someone they barely know.
We're constantly, systematically robbing our future selves because we simply don't recognize them. It's a tragic flaw in our hardware. So if we can't neurologically bond with our 80-year-old selves, how do we solve the retirement crisis? We can't just snap our fingers and turn off present bias.
We can't eliminate present bias. It is too deeply hardwired. The solution isn't to fight the bias. The solution is to use psychological judo to circumvent it.
I love that.
And this leads to arguably the most successful intervention in the history of behavioral economics. It was developed by Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benartzi, and it's called the Save More Tomorrow program.
Let's detail the mechanics of Save More Tomorrow, because it is an absolute masterclass in designing systems around human flaws.
Thaler and Benartzi looked at standard retirement enrollment. Usually, HR asks an employee to take a pay cut today to fund their retirement. Present bias screams, "No, I need that money now."
The pain is immediate.
So Thaler and Benartzi changed the timeline of the pain. Instead of asking employees to save more today, they asked them to commit to saving more in the future.
Okay, leaning into the dynamic inconsistency.
Exactly. They asked employees to commit a portion of their future salary includes their next raise to their retirement fund. When the employee signs the paperwork, they're making a commitment today. But the actual financial sacrifice is pushed off onto future you.
Brilliant.
Because it doesn't cost present you a single dime today, present bias doesn't trigger a defense mechanism. The employee easily agrees.
But the real genius is what happens when the raise actually hits, right? Because they bypass loss aversion too.
That is the secondary brilliance of the system. Let's say you get a 5% raise and you've committed 3% of it to the retirement account. Your actual take-home paycheck still goes up by 2%.
Right.
Your paycheck never shrinks. You never experience a nominal decrease in your current standard of living. Because you don't feel a reduction, loss aversion is never triggered. You bypass present bias on the front end, and you bypass loss aversion on the back end.
You essentially trick the brain into doing the right thing, and the real-world results of this were absolutely staggering, weren't they?
Transformative. Within a few years of implementation, employees in these programs quadrupled their savings rates, all without ever feeling the psychological pinch of a pay cut. It proved that while we are inherently flawed planners, we can build external architectures that save us from ourselves.
It's an incredible success story. But, as we look at this, at how deeply biased we are, how emotionally erratic we are, how bad we are at planning for tomorrow, I have to point out a massive, almost comical paradox in human nature.
What?
We have just spent the last half hour proving how terrible we are at making rational choices. Yet, if you survey the average person, we all walk around with an unshakable belief that we are absolute geniuses at planning, investing, and navigating the world.
We are remarkably blind to our own incompetence. We suffer from a profound illusion of competence, which acts as an accelerant for all the other biases we discussed.
Let's examine the above-average illusion. The statistical data on this is simultaneously hilarious and terrifying.
It's a statistical impossibility that perfectly illustrates systematic overconfidence. When researchers conduct broad surveys asking people to rate their own abilities, whether it's driving a car, managing a project, or investing in the stock market, they consistently find that 70, 80, sometimes 90% of respondents rate themselves as above average.
Which is mathematically impossible. By definition, 50% of the population must be below the median. You cannot have 80% of people be above average.
The math refuses to allow it. Yet the vast majority of us possess a deeply inflated sense of our own skills and risk assessment capabilities. We assume the biases apply to other people but not to us. And this overconfidence is heavily compounded by a cognitive phenomenon known as the Dunning-Kruger effect.
The Dunning-Kruger effect. It explains so much of the confidence you see on the internet. How does it specifically manifest in finance?
In the realm of financial decision-making, the Dunning-Kruger effect creates an incredibly dangerous inversion of confidence and competence. The research shows that the individuals with the least amount of financial literacy, the lowest actual competence in understanding markets, valuations, and risk, tend to possess the highest level of supreme confidence in their abilities.
Why? Is it just arrogance?
It's not necessarily arrogance, it's a cognitive deficit. Because they lack a foundational understanding of the domain, they are literally incapable of perceiving the complexity of the market. They don't know what they don't know. To them, investing looks easy, so they are highly confident. Conversely, highly educated, highly confident financial professionals often exhibit lower confidence. They underestimate their relative standing because they are acutely, painfully aware of all the unknown variables, macroeconomic crosscurrents, and historical anomalies that make investing so difficult.
So the people who are most likely to make catastrophic, leveraged bets on a meme stock are the exact people who are most utterly convinced they cannot fail. That is a toxic combination.
It really is.
And this overconfidence doesn't just ruin individual portfolios, it scales up and destroys our ability to plan anything accurately. This brings us to Kahneman and Tversky's work on the planning fallacy.
The planning fallacy is the direct application of overconfidence to timelines and budgets. Kahneman and Tversky documented that human beings systematically, predictably, and often vastly underestimate how much time a task will take to complete and how much money it will cost to finish.
And the most frustrating part is that we do this even when we have a lifetime of personal evidence proving we are wrong.
That is the defining characteristic of the fallacy. You can have a track record of 20 past projects, every single one of which ran late and over budget. But when you sit down to plan project number 21, your brain resets.
You think this time will be different.
You convince yourself that this time will be different. You assume that your current plan is flawless and will execute perfectly.
We are hopelessly, structurally optimistic. We plan for the happy path where nothing ever goes wrong, and the sources dive into a massive, real-world arena where the planning fallacy is put on full display, costing billions of dollars large-scale construction and infrastructure projects.
Mega projects are the ultimate monument to the planning fallacy. Look at the historical data for building high-speed rail networks, new international airports, Olympic stadiums, or massive tunnel systems.
It's bad.
The data is astonishingly consistent across different decades, different continents, and different political systems. These mega projects routinely run 40 to 80% over budget and 20 to 45% over schedule. It is almost a universal law.
Decades of data showing the exact same failure rate. My immediate instinct, and I think the instinct of the general public, is to look at a bridge that is $1 billion over budget and blame the people in charge. We assume the engineers are incompetent, or the politicians are corrupt, or the contractors are lying.
And while politics certainly plays a role, the researchers emphasize a vital clarification. The root cause is not widespread incompetence. The engineers and project managers are often brilliant professionals.
Then what is it?
What we are seeing in that data is a macro demonstration of the systematic human optimism baked into our cognition. When a committee sits down to plan a 10-year bridge project, they build a bottom-up estimate based on everything going according to plan. They fail to adequately price in the unknown unknowns.
The black swans, the supply chain strike in another country, the sudden change in environmental regulations, the historic rainfall that halts construction for a month.
Exactly. They view those risks as abstract improbabilities rather than statistical inevitabilities. So the budget is doomed from day one.
So, if we are fundamentally incapable of trusting our own estimates, what is the cure? How do we ever build an accurate budget for a new project? The sources introduce a methodology championed by Kahneman and a researcher named Bent Fleibjerg that feels completely counterintuitive.
Fleibjerg's solution is a technique called reference class forecasting. And you're right, the premise feels deeply unnatural to a planner. The methodology dictates that when you are creating a budget or timeline for a complex new project, you should initially completely ignore the specific granular details of your own plan.
Just throw your own blueprint out the window.
Throw out the bottom-up estimates. Stop obsessing over how fast your specific crew can pour concrete or how cheap your supplier is. Instead, you zoom entirely out. You ask one objective question: what is the historical statistical outcome of a broad class of past projects that are similar to this one? You look at the reference class.
So if I'm building a new stadium, I don't look at my own spreadsheets. I look at the last 50 stadiums built around the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if the data shows that the reference class of the last 50 stadiums ran an average of 60% over budget, you simply take your baseline estimate and add 60% to it on day one. You anchor your forecast to historical reality rather than internal optimism.
Trust the baseline, not your confidence. I was trying to map this to everyday life, and it's exactly how GPS navigation apps work for a road trip.
Oh, that's a great example.
Imagine you were driving to a city 4 hours away. You pull out a map and you think, I know a great shortcut. I'm an excellent driver. I'll only stop once for gas. I can make this drive in 3 hours and 15 minutes. You have built a highly detailed, highly optimistic, bottom-up plan for your specific trip.
But the GPS algorithm doesn't care about your optimism.
Not at all. The GPS looks at the reference class. It pulls the telemetry data of the thousands of other drivers who navigated that exact same route on that exact same day of a week at that exact same time. It aggregates the reality of traffic, accidents, and stoplights. And the GPS tells you, objectively, no, this drive is going to take you 4 hours and 10 minutes. And the maddening thing is, the GPS is almost always right.
It is a perfect analogy. Reference class forecasting is simply GPS for financial planning.
Yeah.
It forces you to override your internal illusion of competence with cold, hard historical data.
It's an incredibly powerful tool, but, as we step back and look at all these planning failures, there's another layer we have to address. Part of the reason we constantly miscalculate our budgets and fail to reach our goals isn't just internal optimism. It's that the finish line we are aiming for refuses to stand still.
Right.
We aren't planning for a static life in a vacuum. We are planning while simultaneously trying to keep pace with everyone around us.
Yes. We have to transition from the internal flaws of the brain to the external pressures of society. We have arrived at the invisible rat race, social comparison, and lifestyle inflation.
This is the section of the research that gets uncomfortably relatable because it deals with the power of the reference point.
This is arguably one of the most powerful, persistent drivers of financial anxiety. Human beings rarely evaluate their financial success or their level of comfort in absolute terms.
Explain that.
If you have a weatherproof roof over your head, a locked door, clean running water, and a refrigerator full of food, you are in absolute historical terms incredibly wealthy. You have achieved profound security.
But nobody wakes up in a modern suburb and feels like royalty just because they have running water.
Because our brains don't process absolute wealth. We process relative wealth. We evaluate our financial standing strictly by comparing it to the apparent financial position of our reference group, our neighbors, our coworkers, our siblings, and increasingly the curated lives of people we follow on the internet. We constantly check our status against the local hierarchy.
We measure our worth by looking over the fence. And the sources detail a compelling theory by Cornell economist Robert Frank that explains how this social comparison creates a domino effect across the entire economy. He calls it expenditure cascades.
Frank's theory of expenditure cascades illustrates how shifting reference points force everyone to spend more. The cascade begins at the very top of the income distribution.
The ultra-wealthy.
Let's say the ultra-wealthy, the billionaires and deca-millionaires experience a surge in income. They naturally increase their consumption. They build 30,000 square foot mansions. They buy super yachts. They throw lavish, multi-million-dollar parties.
They raise the ceiling of what luxury looks like.
Now look at the group just below them, the merely wealthy, the people worth maybe 10 or 20 million. They interact with the ultra-wealthy. They see the super yachts and the massive estates. Their reference point for what is normal success shifts upward.
So they spend more to keep up.
To maintain their relative status in their social circles, they feel compelled to increase their own spending. Maybe they upgrade to a larger estate or start flying exclusively private.
And the pressure just rolls downhill.
It cascades. The upper middle class, the successful doctors, lawyers, executives, see the wealthy spending more. So the upper middle class feels the pressure to renovate their kitchens with professional-grade appliances, buy luxury SUVs, and hire private tutors for their kids.
Creating a new standard.
This creates a new, highly visible standard of living that the middle class then observes. Suddenly, the middle class feels a profound, invisible pressure to take on debt just to buy the slightly larger house or the newer car, simply to ensure they aren't falling behind in the relative hierarchy. Everyone at every level is forced to run faster just to stay in the exact same place.
Which perfectly explains the trap of lifestyle inflation. It's a phenomenon I think almost everyone has experienced or witnessed. You have a young professional making $50,000 a year. They are living in a cramped apartment, they are stressed about bills, and they swear to themselves, if I could just get promoted and make $100,000, my life would be perfect. I would save so much money. All my financial stress would evaporate.
But look at the data on what actually happens when they hit that $100,000 mark.
And their savings rate doesn't budge, it flatlines. Because when they get the promotion and double their income, they don't stay in the cramped apartment. They move to a nicer neighborhood. They socialize with other people making $100,000. They notice their new peers are driving newer cars and taking vacations to Europe.
The reference group shifts.
Their reference group has fundamentally shifted. Their internal expectation of what constitutes a normal baseline life has shifted.
And suddenly, their spending organically rises to completely consume the new income. They are making twice as much money, but because their reference point moved, they feel just as financially stretched, just as stressed as they did at 50,000.
They aren't actually chasing a fixed dollar amount of security. They are chasing a relative position in a social hierarchy. And the goalposts for that hierarchy are strapped to a treadmill, which leads to the ultimate perennial question about money. Does acquiring more of it actually make us happier? There is a fascinating piece of research in the sources that updates a very famous psychological benchmark.
You're referring to the $75,000 happiness cap.
Yeah.
For years, the prevailing wisdom in psychology, partially based on older research by Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton, was that money increases happiness up to an income of about $75,000 a year. The theory was that once your basic needs are met and you have a small buffer against emergencies, extra money ceases to move the emotional needle.
Right. The idea was that billionaire isn't fundamentally happier on a Tuesday than a comfortable middle-class teacher. But the sources highlight a 2021 study by Matthew Killingsworth from the University of Pennsylvania that challenged that cap. And the methodology he used is crucial to why the answer changed.
Killingsworth's study was a massive methodological upgrade. The older studies relied on retrospective evaluation, asking people to remember how happy they felt over the past week or month. Our memories, as we know, are flawed.
So what did he do differently?
Killingsworth utilized smartphones to conduct experiential sampling. He pinged thousands of participants at random moments throughout the day and asked them to rate their exact level of well-being right in that specific moment.
Real-time, granular data. And what did the millions of data points reveal?
The new data showed that the $75,000 plateau is largely a myth. Experienced well-being, actual day-to-day happiness does continue to rise with income, well into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. More money can, in fact, continue to buy more happiness. The curve doesn't arbitrarily stop.
However, there is a massive, incredibly important caveat to Killingsworth's findings. It isn't a blank check for materialism.
The caveat is everything. The data showed that the continued rise in happiness works best and is most pronounced for people who are not primarily motivated by money itself and who do not equate their personal self-worth with their net worth.
Let's unpack the so what of that nuance, because it connects back to the expenditure cascades. If you earn an extra $50,000, and you use that capital to align your life with your deeper personal values. Maybe you buy yourself more free time by outsourcing chores. Maybe you reduce your daily stress. Maybe you use it to support your family or pursue a meaningful hobby. Your happiness scales upward.
Yeah.
You are utilizing the money as a versatile tool to engineer well-being.
The money is serving your internal metric of success.
But if you take that exact same extra $50,000 and use it strictly to fuel status competition, to buy the flashier car simply to keep up with the Joneses, to fund your participation in the expenditure cascade, the emotional benefit of that wealth largely evaporates. You don't actually get happier. You just buy yourself a more expensive treadmill to run on.
Because you are deploying your resources into a battle of social comparison that is mathematically unwinnable, there will always be a higher reference point. There will always be someone richer.
Looking back over this entire landscape we've mapped out today, we've got loss aversion making us hold on to dying investments. We've got mental accounting destroying our fungibility and blinding us to debt. The availability heuristic is distorting our reality. Present bias is robbing our future selves. We suffer from the illusion of competence, and we are trapped in an invisible rat race of social comparison.
It's quite a list.
I have to be honest, internalizing all of this leaves me feeling a little bleak. It paints a picture of the human brain as fundamentally hopelessly broken when it comes to money. Like we are running on defective, bug-ridden hardware.
It is a very common reaction when you first digest behavioral economics. It feels like an indictment of human intelligence. But the sources provide a vital, deeply reassuring reframe in the final section. We need to zoom out and look at the broader evolutionary picture.
Okay, I could use some reassurance.
The ultimate truth is we are not broken. Our hardware is not defective. In fact, our brains are perfectly, exquisitely evolved. The friction exists because we are perfectly evolved for a world that simply no longer exists.
It's an evolutionary mismatch. These behaviors are features, not bugs.
Exactly. We have to stop viewing these cognitive biases as random errors or signs of stupidity. They are highly coherent, ruthlessly efficient psychological adaptations to our ancestral environments. Let's revisit the biases through a purely evolutionary lens.
Let's do it.
Take loss aversion, the mathematical reality that losing hurts twice as much as gaining feels good.
In a modern stock market, that makes us terrible, irrational investors.
But rewind the clock 100,000 years. You are living on the savannah. Survival is incredibly fragile, existing on the razor's edge of starvation. In that environment, if you stumble upon an extra day's worth of food, that is a gain. It's a nice bonus, it feels good. But if you lose a day's worth of food, that isn't just a bummer, that is an existential threat. You die.
The stakes for losing were absolute.
Therefore, developing a neurological hypersensitivity to loss, a severe pain response that made you guard your resources ferociously, was a brilliant survival mechanism. It kept our ancestors alive.
Wow, okay. What about present bias? Why prioritize today over tomorrow?
Well, if the future is entirely uncertain, if you have no idea if you will survive the winter, or if you might be eaten by a predator tomorrow afternoon, it is completely mathematically rational to consume your calories and resources right now. Saving your berries for a hypothetical 30-year retirement makes zero sense if your life expectancy is volatile.
Present bias was the optimal strategy for a dangerous world. And even social comparison, the keeping up with the Joneses. Today, we view it as superficial vanity. But in an ancestral tribal environment, your relative position in the social hierarchy wasn't just about ego. It dictated your access to genuine survival resources, the safest sleeping spot, the best food, reproductive mates.
Being socially inferior or ostracized was a literal death sentence. So constantly monitoring your status against your peers was a vital defense mechanism.
Our brains are executing the exact programming they were designed to run to keep us alive. The tragedy is simply that a highly leveraged mortgage, a complex derivatives market, and a 401k account do not behave like a predator or a berry bush. To bring this entire behavioral framework together, the sources reconstruct an incredibly powerful historical example, the 2006 housing bubble.
This is where theory meets reality. Let's look at the psychology of someone who bought way too much house at the absolute peak of the market, right before the 2008 crash. Often, history and the media paint these individuals as foolish, greedy, or economically illiterate. But let's look at the psychological environment they were operating in.
It was a perfect storm of the exact evolutionary biases we just outlined. First, look at the availability heuristic. For years leading up to 2006, housing prices had been climbing rapidly and vividly. Every available memory in their mind, every headline on the evening news, every story from a coworker was about real estate making people rich. The narrative, housing never goes down, was hyper-available. Their internal risk assessment was artificially zeroed out by recent memory.
Second, you have present bias. The financial industry engineered mortgage structures like exotic adjustable rate mortgages or interest-only loans that offered massive immediate gratification. The buyer could secure the keys to the giant dream house now, today. And the pain, the exploding interest rates, and unmanageable payments was pushed years into the future onto that psychologically distant future self.
And third, you have extreme social comparison. They looked around their reference group. Everyone else was upgrading to massive houses, pulling equity out to buy SUVs. The expenditure cascade was in full effect. If they chose to rent or buy a modest home, they felt an intense evolutionary panic that they were falling down the social hierarchy.
When you combine all of those forces, a distorted perception of risk via the availability heuristic, the allure of immediate gratification via present bias, and the tribal pressure of social comparison, you realize that the person buying that house wasn't stupid. They weren't broken. They were acting exactly, perfectly as human nature designed them to act.
They were just operating in a totally alien, modern financial environment that had inadvertently weaponized their own evolutionary survival traits against them.
That is the crucial empathy we have to bring to financial psychology.
And I think that is the ultimate actionable lesson from all the research we've unpacked today. The goal of understanding behavioral economics is to replace self-condemnation with curiosity. The objective is not to beat yourself up every time you hold on to a bad stock or buy a coffee you don't need or feel a pang of jealousy over a neighbor's car. And the goal is most definitely not to try and force yourself to become some cold, unfeeling, perfectly rational, calculating machine.
Attempting to strip the emotion out of money is a fool's errand. It is impossible. Money is legitimately deeply emotional because it acts as a proxy for the most fundamental human needs: security, freedom, status, meaning, and the ability to provide for the people we love. You cannot separate the math from the humanity.
Instead, the strategy is to acknowledge our evolutionary wiring. We have to expect our predictable missteps. The next time you feel that intense visceral panic to sell your index funds at the bottom of a market dip, or you feel that sudden urge to blow your tax refund on a luxury item, you can observe that feeling objectively. You can take a breath and say, okay, that isn't a rational signal. That's just my ancient brain trying to survive on the savannah.
You observe the impulse without blindly obeying it. And then you take the final step. You design better personal financial environments. You acknowledge present bias, so you set up automatic payroll deductions for your savings, removing the choice entirely.
Right.
You acknowledge loss aversion, so you implement a mandatory 48-hour cooling-off period before making any purchase over $500. You acknowledge the availability heuristic, so you delete the volatile investing app from your phone's home screen. You build habits and architectures that work with your psychology, rather than fighting a losing, exhausting battle against millions of years of evolution.
What an incredible, clarifying journey we've taken today. We've gone from the academic myth of the perfectly rational human spreadsheet, down through the S-curves of loss aversion, into the messy mental buckets we sort our money into, all the way back to the survival mechanisms of our ancestors. It really does change the lens through which you view every single transaction you make.
It's been a fascinating exploration. Once you see the biases, you can't unsee them.
You see them everywhere. Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with a brand new thought to mull over. Something that builds on this idea of designing systems for our ancient brains, but looks forward into the immediate future. If our deepest psychological biases like loss aversion, the endowment effect, and mental accounting evolved in an intensely physical world of tangible physical resources, what happens to our financial psychology as money becomes entirely invisible?
Oh, that's a great question.
Think about your daily life right now. As we accelerate toward a totally cashless, frictionless digital economy, where you tap a smartwatch to buy groceries, where you double-click a phone to buy a car, where you never physically hand over a paper dollar or feel the tangible weight of a purchase, will our ancient brains become even more detached from the reality of our spending? If you think your present bias is difficult to manage now, wait until your future self's finances are entirely managed, spent, and allocated by frictionless algorithms. How do we build safeguards when the friction of spending drops to absolute zero?
That is a chilling but absolutely necessary question for the next decade.
It brings us right back to where we started. We initially went looking for a clean, black and white spreadsheet, a simple mathematical x-ray of our financial lives. But the reality of human behavior is so much murkier, so much more complex, and ultimately, so much more human. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, watch out for those mental buckets, and we will see you next time.